Several weeks ago, a couple months ago, whatever, I was doing a series on restoration. This idea that things along the course of time, we drift away. I guess my communion meditation would fall into that same category. It's a pretty common idea that we just need to keep going back to see what the Bible has to say about different subjects. And I'm going to start a series where I'm going to do that in regard to the position and the persons of elders in the church. I've been at some churches, maybe you have too, where at least in practice, it seems like the job of the elders is to vote and give communion meditations. Maybe, in doing the latter, they sit in a special chair during the service. And so I see some smiles. We've seen that. Is that what the Bible says? Is that what the Bible says about being an elder? And you can probably guess the answer is no. So we're going to look at this subject, and the purpose is so that elders, both current and future elders, know what is expected by God versus the people. People have expectations, but that's the other side of it. So that we all would know what should we expect of elders and not expect of elders from a biblical perspective. So we're going to introduce the idea today and look at qualifications, and then we're going to look at the roles, the tasks that the Bible does say elders are to fulfill. So there won't be one main passage today to turn to. I'll have some up here on the screen. There's a couple if you want to keep your finger in them when we get to them, you can, because we'll be referring back to them. But one idea I want us to see, because this is definitely part of the confusion. There we go. Is 1 Peter 5, 1-2. Let's look at the biblical terms that are associated with this. It says there, Peter's writing, he says, the elders, and the Greek word is presbyteros, who are among you, I exhort. Be shepherds, the Greek word is poimen, of the flock of God, which is among you, serving as overseers or episkopos. So you look there, and there's three different Greek words. Presbyteros, poimen, and episkopos. And that poimen, it's translated shepherds. That's what the word it gives us pastor. And overseer is the word that often is translated or becomes the office of bishop. And when you look at this verse here, what does that verse tell us about those three terms? Who do they refer to?
All the same person.
Yeah, they're all the same. Those are not three different offices, are they? It's three different ways of referring to the same office, the same group of people who are in those offices. The original meetings, an elder was just that, an older person. And to be recognized as an elder in the Jewish culture or in the Christian culture, in that position, well, then you'd be an older person who's recognized as a leader. A pastor was a shepherd, and it drew heavily on the biblical and cultural images of literal shepherds and sheep, and we see that. And then an overseer, that was actually a term that was used for Greek officials, and in no way does that violate the church's family or body nature. It's just the focus in the Bible is on the function versus, the title of honor. This is what you are to be doing, just like these Greek officials do. That's what the words meant then. What about today? When you hear the word elder, what do you think of?
Someone who's been in the church a long time.
That might be it. In our group of churches, what do we think of as an elder?
Leader.
Yeah, a leader. It's like, okay, those are the earthly leaders of the church, as far as we use that word. What about pastor? What do you think of when you hear that word pastor?
Preacher.
Yeah, typically it refers to the preacher. It's become a synonym for the preacher. You'll have some churches that will have either the pastor or the lead pastor, the preaching pastor, and then you might have some others, the worship pastor, the evangelism, discipleship pastor, things like that. But then the children's minister, it's a woman, because you wouldn't want to misuse the term in two ways. But we've come to do it that way. What about bishop? What do you think of then?
He's over the pastors.
over the pastors in some churches, right? Yeah, and you might start to think about, Catholic churches. I'm not even sure if Lutheran uses that or not.
Amish.
Yeah, Amish, yeah, they definitely use that. Yeah, we were at a Lutheran service, funeral service this week. A little bit out of the box for me. One thing, the preacher preached from this pedestal, it was like 10 feet high, climbed upstairs to get to it. I could go for that, looking down on you all.
Oh, what, yeah.
Hey, it was a little strange. But again, these words have implications nowadays that had nothing to do with back then. They were all words that referred to the same office, the same group of people. So for the sake of clarity, we need to make sure people know what we mean when we use these terms. Again, elders are not a group of people above or below staff who make decisions but are not involved in direct ministry. And the terms of overseers, the term of pastors, I think I've shared before. If someone came into a church I was at in Red Key before the service and said, "Is there a pastor here?" And I said, "Yeah, there's two of them. The two elders." And I know this person was looking for me, but, I had to be biblical. It was Sunday morning. What about then the relationship of elders to paid staff? What does the Bible say about that subject?
They can be the same person.
Yeah, that's what it says about that. The only people who were paid were elders in the New Testament. There were no paid staff who weren't elders. Other than, of a local church, and we'll look at a couple verses there. The New Testament says that elders are worthy of double honor. 1 Timothy 5:17-18 says, "Let the elders who rule well be considered worthy of double honor." What are the two honors? What's the first honor?
The position.
Just the position being, it is an honor to be an earthly leader of the Church of God. What's the double honor then? Money, yeah, he's going to say that. "Especially those who labor in preaching and teaching. For the scripture says, 'You shall not muzzle an ox when it treads out the grain, and the laborer deserves his wages.'" So Paul makes it clear that's what the other honor is. So if an elder rules well in general, good at it, and probably means they can focus their time on it, and then obviously getting paid would allow them to focus more time on it. Like, if that's the person that's doing a great job, do what you can to make sure he can focus on that job. And the same thing for someone who preaches and teaches. So those were the people who were certainly, the word staff doesn't even apply, but were paid out of the offerings of the church. Now, there is one other verse that talks about this somewhat. The apostles in 1 Corinthians 9:5-6 says, "Do we not have the right to take along a believing wife, as do the other apostles and the brothers of the Lord and Cephas," or Peter? "Or is it only Barnabas and I who have no right to refrain from working for a living?" So he's making the point that the apostles were supported as they traveled around, spreading the gospel and planting churches. The current model of hiring staff from outside the local church doesn't fit either example of what was happening with elders or the apostles. What potential issues can the current model cause? Where we bring in people from outside.
Turns into just a job.
Turns into just a job. Yeah, definitely at first, there's not as much of a connection with those people there. The staff are seen as employees because what happens? Well, they're here for a while, then they're gone, they get a different job offer, then they go there. So they are, transitory employees. There's no real connection. How could we help to avoid that problem?
Pick from within.
Yeah, raise up people within the church. That's certainly what was happening, in the churches there. How should elders and paid staff relate to one another? Again, we could spend a lot of time on this. I would say elders are definitely the earthly leaders of a church, but they're not to be hands-off. They're to be participating in the ministry. They're not to view staff as just a hired hand, but if anything, it's someone we needed because that gift wasn't present. So we hired someone because we needed that gift. And if it is the preaching and teaching is often the case, all right. But there needs to be seen that idea, and it is allowable, certainly, for a hired preacher to, I would not recommend initially being an elder, but to come to see, do they have the heart for that, and does it fit with the church? Any questions about that introductory stuff before we move on to qualifications and what the Bible says?
I think feels like if you did it for financial obligation or just money, your heart's not going to be in it as well as it would be if you did it for love out of people in your church.
Right, and we're going to see that one of the qualifications. Paul makes it clear that it's okay to pay elders. It's not just okay, it's what you need to do, so they can focus on that if that's where they're gifted. But it shouldn't be the reason they do it. So let's look, the biblical qualifications for elders. We're going to go through these today. There's two passages where Paul gives the qualifications. They have a lot of overlap, but they have some individual things. So let's look at these here. This is where if you wanted to keep this passage open, you could, because we're going to be going back to the individual sides. But 1 Timothy 3, 1-7, Paul says, "The saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to the office of overseer," and there's that word used there, but we know now that's talking about an elder, "he desires a noble task. Therefore, an overseer must be above reproach." I highlighted that idea of must, and we're going to see above reproach come back. "The husband of one wife, sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not a drunkard, not violent but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. He must manage his own household well, with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. For if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he care for God's church? He must not be a recent convert, or he may become puffed up with conceit and fall into the condemnation of the devil." Oh, and I haven't switched it, have I? "Moreover, he must be well thought of by outsiders, so that he may not fall into disgrace, into a snare of the devil." So that's what Paul writes in Timothy. Then Titus, Paul says this. He's writing to the person named Titus. "This is why I left you in Crete, so that you might put what remained into order and appoint elders in every town as I directed you. If anyone is above reproach, the husband of one wife, and his children are believers, and not open to the charge of debauchery or insubordination. For an overseer, as God's steward, must be above reproach. He must not be arrogant or quick-tempered, or a drunkard, or violent, or greedy for gain, but hospitable, a lover of good, self-controlled, upright, holy, and disciplined. He must hold firm to the trustworthy word as taught, so that he may be able to give instruction in sound doctrine, and also to rebuke those who contradict it." All right, so what is Paul saying there? I mean, you could certainly look at those things and say, well, there's no one in the world qualified to be an elder. And definitely that could, you look at those, you could take it that way. I think the guiding principle, and it's why I highlighted it, is this idea of above reproach. It occurs in both of the passages, twice in Titus, once in Timothy. The NIV for that uses the word blameless. And again, obviously it does not mean sin-free, or there are no one who would be qualified there. But I think that what he's talking about, and Timothy also uses in that passage, he talks about well thought of by outsiders. I think this is the overarching, all-embracing qualification, and that's why that word must is repeated. Nothing that would undermine your authority as an elder, nothing that would undermine the respect that people in the church would have for you, and people outside the church. Basically, I think what Paul is saying, and then he goes on to give, here's what, the individual traits that make up this above reproach, is you want someone to be an elder that, again, both someone in the church wouldn't look at it and say, why in the world is that person our elder? Or someone outside the church saying, that's your leader? I think I'll stay away. And everything else is, again, examples of here's what that looks like into practice. And so what follows are the traits that make a person above reproach. And they're also, I believe, the key to judging exactly what does Paul mean by those traits. Their interpretation and their fulfillment. So let's jump in. Let's get the most debatable ones out of the way first. The husband of one wife. That one's found in both lists. Literally, it says a one-wife husband or a one-woman man is how it could be translated. There's 4 possible interpretations. The first one is elders must be married. Doesn't say that. Doesn't say that. Paul said a one-wife man not must have a wife. And it would contradict what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 7 about the advantages of being single. That there are some advantages there. So I don't believe an elder has to be married. Elders, the second interpretation, elders must not be polygamous. In other words, you can't have more than one wife. That one is possible, but unlikely. It also opens up a little can of worms, because it would, if you don't plan on being an elder, then you would be able to have more than one wife, according to what Paul is saying here, if he's making that the qualification for an elder. So, shaking your head. The other thought of that, if you had more than one wife, it'd probably reduce the chance of you ever living to become elder. For a variety of reasons. I don't think that's what he's talking about. The third interpretation, elders must have married only once. This would prohibit divorced men who remarry and widowers who remarry. There's certainly no basis regarding widowers. That if a man was married, his wife died, he married another woman, that, okay, you now cannot be an elder because you're on your second wife, even though your first wife passed away. What about divorced? Okay. What if it was a biblical divorce? There are two exemptions given, one by Jesus, one by Paul, that says God doesn't like divorce, but in this situation, it's understandable. What if it is non-biblical, but it was driven by the spouse and the man didn't want it at all? What if it happened before the man became a Christian? Now he's a Christian and married to a woman, or not, and a great marriage. Or as a Christian, but when the person was young and immature in the faith, and now they're older. Where do you take those? And there is no set biblical, okay, here's the absolute answer. I think what guides it is that principle again, above reproach. What is the situation? What was the situation? What is the situation now? Is this a person that can be a respected leader of the church? The fourth way of looking at it is elders must be maritally and sexually above reproach. The point's not how often a person has been married directly, but how the person conducts themselves in the marriage. There's some people who, man's been married to the woman maybe 30, 40 years, but you look at the way he treats his wife, that's not someone you would want to be an elder in your church. So I think that's the basic idea of a one-woman man. And that's one of the possible ways to interpret that phrase. I'm a one-woman man. I'm faithful to this wife in a way that shows a love for her. Again, that is not, people would probably fall into the third or fourth interpretation there. Absolutely divorce disqualifies, perhaps even being widowed disqualifies, a widower, or the fourth one that, what is the situation? What was the situation? What is it now? The next one. His children are believers. That's found in Titus. Well, it's assumed if the person is old enough to be considered for elder, he will have children. But does it require children? Do you have to have children to be an elder? Do you have to have more than one? It's plural here. What if you only have one child? Can you be an elder? What if the children are not old enough to believe? If you waited later in life to have kids? They haven't made that decision yet, but you are at the point where the church feels you're spiritually mature enough. How's that fit? What if an adult child falls away? You've raised your children, they were in the church, they were believers, and now one of the adult children has fallen away. Are you disqualified from being an elder? What if that child comes back? Are you now qualified to be an elder? I'm not saying you had no input in that child coming back, but they're out of the house making decisions on their own. Does that reflect on you? Is whether or not the child still lives at home a factor? There are no set answers on that as I give these. Again, the thing that needs to guide is this person above reproach? You look at the way this person dealt with their family and their kids. Is it something that you would look and say, yes, that person tried all they could in a godly way? Or you look and say, no, that person didn't follow the biblical example. Along those same lines, children are not open to the charge of debauchery, excessive indulgence in sensual pleasures, or insubordination, rebellion. That's showing there as well. He must manage his own household. Timothy gives the version of that. Well, with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. Manage means to lead and care for. It certainly means to provide for financially, emotionally, spiritually. The key measurement is his children's behavior. They must obey and submit to their father's leadership. Children don't need to be perfect any more than the elder. The man needs to be perfect, but the father works to resolve problems in responsible and caring ways. It says with all dignity. That means versus a spirit-crushing tyrant. You know, there are some fathers who, again, just the way that, they're tyrants. Maybe you've seen this. And, instead of working to build that child up, crushes the spirit. That's something that Paul is saying here. No. Again, how is this impacted by children who live at home under the father's authority versus children who are out of the home? Another possibility, what if the children, again, outside of the house, they're no longer there? Any questions, any discussion on that? I'm interested always in hearing. The husband of one wife, the children aspect. We get past these, the others are pretty easy, but this is where typically I've seen the disagreement.
Most of the time, at least I believe it was in Josephus, but the average person in Jesus' day had been divorced 4 times. And so you'll notice when Jesus lays out the directions to the apostles, that no, Moses let you divorce, but I say no. The apostles are like, what are you
That's
talking
crazy,
about?
yeah.
That's a horrible, that's a tough saying. Who could possibly do that? So I don't think it was meant to outlaw divorce of someone who hadn't been divorced at some point. And polygamy wouldn't have been quite so uncommon then as it is now.
Right, absolutely. It was
I've always assumed that that's mostly what he was talking about. You gotta
so
be
the
careful.
one-woman man type.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you gotta be careful when you start looking at all these exceptions, because at some point then the whole rule becomes pointless. You can always look for an exception, but I've always said he needs to be the husband of one wife. I think he needs to be married, and just from the job that he's got to do, if he's not married, I don't think he's gonna be able to do his job, because there's qualifications for his wife also. And
So even a widower.
I don't know that I would say when he's appointed. I don't know that you take somebody whose wife died and then say, I've seen that done.
You're out.
And I don't know that I would go that far. But again, when you start looking at all these exceptions, then all of a sudden, then the whole rule becomes pointless.
Right.
So you can't really be saying, well, in this case, maybe it doesn't apply. I think at some point, there's no right, express right to become another. And it may be that you're not qualified, and it may be you may have done everything right, but one of your kids just turned out to be a complete loser. I think you still say no, because the qualifications given. So when you start making exceptions, eventually you just wipe out the whole qualification.
Yeah, you could obviously go that far. Again, I keep taking this idea of above reproach. And that's where I'd say if everyone else and one child went off, is that person above reproach? Did you live a life that we would say, they were a good father, this child went off? I don't know, there is no set answer. A church is going to have to come to their decision on some. I want us to see what does it say, like the communion meditation. Well, I've always heard you need to examine yourself. Yeah, but what's it look like in practice? And so I've seen that, and I've seen, more extreme. Yeah. And then I look at this, and where does it fall? And you can take any of these. You can't use above reproach if you have no objective standard for what's blameless and above reproach. That's what Paul is doing, is giving these standards. So, any other thoughts on that?
When you're married, a man is married, say 4 or 5 times, don't that set a pattern of something being wrong?
I would say, yeah.
And that puts it.
So even if they all died, you have to look into something there. Start wondering a little bit. Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, that's what what does this person's experience show about that person? I think that's what it's saying, and these are the areas you should use to judge that. And a big one is, they both talk about it. The marriage situation and the family situation needs to be a big part of it.
I think though, if somebody's been married and divorced 5 times, I mean, it's probably gonna show that he does have things that are wrong. I mean, we're looking at individual circumstances here, and it's an individual case basis kind of thing. I mean, above reproach, somebody could be in their teens or 20s, somebody totally different than they are in their 50s. So people change and become above reproach
Right.
that weren't before.
Yeah.
So
Going back to that, I forgot the 4 or 5 times. There was when Jesus was asked the rules for divorce, there were 2 schools of thought back then. Hillel and Shammai, I remember from my Bible college class, and I remember Hillel with all the L's, he was the liberal. He said that you could divorce your wife if she burnt the toast. And Shammai's the one that said, no, it has to be, unfaithfulness. And so there's where I guess you could get divorced 4 or 5 times, if you take the very loose approach. All right, toast was bad, you're out. And again, that's definitely going to tell you something about that person. Is that who you want, who God would want, and who would be, people outside the church and inside the church would look at and say, yeah, there's a great leader for us. Absolutely not. Yeah. All right, well, let's look at these others and see what they say. Again, these are generally a little easier to understand. Sober-minded, Timothy says that. Mentally and emotionally stable. Balanced judgment versus rash behavior. Some people just, again, they're going off one direction or the other. They're, maybe getting angry at the slightest thing. Sober-minded. Self-controlled. That's found in both of the lists, specifically in terms of good judgment, discretion, common sense. Maintaining an objective perspective. That's a big one. Being able to step back and look at things and try to set aside, and some people are better at this than others, maybe your personal feelings, your own direct involvement in that, how it might impact you, being self-controlled. Respectable, Timothy says this one, well-behaved and orderly. That which causes a person to be respected by others. That's what respectable is. Hospitable, both of the passages mention this. Hospitable, sharing one's life and home with others. This is a tangible expression of Christian love, and it's necessary for fellowship. What do we see when we were looking through Acts? What have we seen as we talked about restoring fellowship? There needs to be this time spent together. And so a person needs to be hospitable. And as Jerry pointed out, it's not necessarily easy. There are, a sign of, I had in my notes, a sign of a loving, sacrificial, serving spirit. It is that. It's a lot easier just to say, I'm going to sit on my couch and not have anyone over. But to have this fellowship, you got to be willing to do that. And, one thing as an elder, you're setting an example. And so hospitable. And what's interesting, this is on the list with all these others. Respectable and other things we're going to see. Hospitable's right up there. That one's important. Able to teach. Timothy is the one that talks about this. You need to know and understand God's word and be able to convey it to others. Doesn't necessarily mean the gift of teaching, and the Bible makes it clear that we all teach to some degree. Whenever we explain something to someone, we're teaching. But some people certainly have the gift of teaching. You don't have to have the gift of teaching. You don't have to be doing that. That's why Paul said those elders that do are worthy of double honor. But you at least need to be able to explain things on a basic level. Able to teach. Then there are 3 of them. I tried to sort of take them in order. They're not personal character qualities, but they're tasks to commit to. First one is hold firm to the word as taught in Titus. So a total conviction and commitment regardless of pressures to do otherwise. It's one thing to look at some of these, and just what we did. Look at, what's it mean to husband one wife? What's it mean to believe in children? And say, I truly, based on my interpretation, here's what I see, versus, wow, that's not a very popular stance, so I'm going to say this. There's a difference there. Hold firm to the word as taught, which seems to be implied there will be opposition. And we're going to see that when we get to the duties of elders. That is one of the big ones. There will be opposition to the truth. Able to give instruction in sound doctrine. So sort of a subset of teaching here. The focus is on teaching believers here. That let them know, all right, they've come to Christ. Let them know this is what it means. This is the sound doctrine of the deeper elements. And then able to rebuke those who contradict sound doctrine. So the other side of that. Teach people who don't know it, but then also if someone is contradicting it, be able to stand up for the truth. Know it well enough to do that. Refuting unbelievers and false teachers. The next one, and this is found in both lists, not a drunkard, not preoccupied with alcohol or overindulgent, not drinking in a way that would harm his ministry. Now some would say no drinking at all. Paul says don't be a drunkard. That's what it says. Not violent, but gentle. That's found in both. So not bad-tempered, irritable, out of control. You probably know people, like that. Elders will often be involved in tense situations. They must not make them worse. I've been in some situations like that, and I've seen some people who, you're not being level-headed here. You want an elder to be able to do that. Gentle, it goes along with that one. Forbearing, kind, gracious, willing to yield. Making allowances for others' weaknesses. Now, we just saw standing up for doctrine, but realizing where people are. Not retaliating for being wrong. That definitely comes into play. Another separate trait, not quarrelsome. Timothy does this one. Peaceful, uncontentious. And then the one that we mentioned, not a lover of money. That one's in Timothy. Not greedy for gain. That's what Titus says. You're not in it for the personal gain. Your judgment isn't clouded by what can I get out of this? How will it benefit me? The person's content with God's provision. Not a recent convert. Timothy gives this one. No matter how much knowledge a person has, and there are some people who know the Bible very well early on, that person is not spiritually mature. And so in addition to not having the experience necessary to perhaps have the wisdom to make a decision, it also talks about it's very easy then to give it a temptation that, hey, look at me. I'm the young wonder kid. Here I am. And so it makes it difficult in both ways. Well thought of by outsiders. I mentioned this one. Another key overarching characteristic says they must be sort of bookends, this beginning and the end with those ideas. Not arrogant. Titus says this one. Not stubborn or inconsiderate of others' opinions, needs, and desires. That's the arrogant here. It's not just, hey, I'm so great. It's I'm so great to the point of I don't need to listen to what you have to say. Your opinion's not important. You're, discussing it with you. No, I don't need to. I've got it all figured out on my own. That doesn't work. A team player versus focused on himself. A servant of God, not a master of the church. There's a big one. Again, we've probably all seen it in other places. It is not here, and I'm glad to see that. But I've seen it, basically, I'm the elder, I'm in charge. That is not at all the way the Bible shows an elder should be. Not quick-tempered. In Titus, slow to anger. Doesn't mean they're never angry, but there's a level of self-control and self-awareness. There are things that you should get angry about, but there are a lot of things we shouldn't. A lover of good. There's the idea of not just, don't do the bad, but you love good. You want to see good done. You're ready to do what is good and beneficial to others. Upright, Titus gives this one, to live in accordance with God's standards and make fair and just decisions. You know, here's what God's word says, here's what I'm going to do, and it's going to gauge and determine how this person views matters that come up. Holy, Titus says that, devoted to God. Holy literally means separate. Separate from the way the world does it, committed to God, separated from the world in a way that demonstrates and makes possible devotion to God. And this person has made a focus of, I want to be like God. I want to do what he says. And then disciplined. Similar to self-control, a focus on physical desires that would prevent effective leadership. So if there's something that, again, a lack of discipline, and there's certainly, a lot of people that have that, that's not going to work for a church leader in this position. All right, those are all of the traits there. What do you think are the big ideas from this lesson today? We talk about what an elder is and what are the qualifications. What stood out to you as the big ideas?
Well known in the community.
Well known in the community, or definitely to the degree they're known, they're well respected.
Yes.
Yeah.
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 Worthy of honor is pretty big.
Yeah. Why is that important? Why is, and again, how exactly did it say it in Timothy? Thought of well by outsiders. Come on, Timothy.
That would attract.
Or Titus.
Because you're a representative of your,
Yeah, he must be well thought of by outsiders.
Because the outsiders are always judging, right? And they judge starting with the leadership. And you want your church to be as above reproach as possible as well.
Because we're representing God.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, and one thing that you see when you read church history is, definitely the people going out and telling others about Jesus made a big impact, but some of it was the world looking at the church and seeing, wow, these people are really different.
I've heard people say, I wouldn't go to church where that person goes to church.
Yeah.
Because of the way they behave in public. And we like to say, I don't really care what people think. And there's some advantage to that, but you do have to always be in mind of the picture that you're leaving in people's minds of the church.
Yeah. And especially as the leader. Again, if there's someone in the church that, where someone said that, and you're like, well, we're all trying to, get better. We're all in process. But if it's the leader, that would definitely be,
Yeah, it comes down to being a good witness.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, again, to have someone in the church who's, someone would say that about, that's one thing. But to have a leader that they say, I wouldn't go to a church where that person is, the leader, that I think would be a legitimate, criticism, observation. Yeah.
The hard part of that is, and because we've all seen them in churches, where there is an elder that's not in that list, like has issues, to do something about that as a church. I mean, the other elders have to be able to stand up to that. And that's, because the other elders are the only people who can do anything about it.
Yeah.
And that's a challenge.
And that's interesting. As far as I know, there's no passage that, says, here's the procedure for, a troublesome elder.
I remember my brother had to get rid of one, and when he started in Mooresville, and it made a mess. It was difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something that's, and that's where the other elder, all the more reason that the other elders would need to have all of these traits and qualifications, because that'd be a real difficult situation. And would also have to have the respect of the people. That the people could say, all right, if this is what our group of elders says, we respect that. And that's why it all goes back to that idea of above reproach
to desire to be an elder, you should have all of these traits.
Yeah.
If you don't, forget it.
And maybe some of the idea is, yeah, I've heard it said, the more you desire, the less you have all the traits. There should be an element of humility. Because again, you read through these and you think, who in the world? So yeah, you got to have that balance of, I got to find someone humble enough that realizes, wow, it's a big deal to be an elder, versus someone who says, wow, I can't wait, I want to be, in charge. I
Sounds
want to
like
be
me.
there. Yeah. I know some churches would, it doesn't matter how old you are, they wouldn't let, they have like a waiting period, and if a person has a problem with that, well, then they're not meeting these other traits. Yeah. If they can't respect what a church has done, well, then they're not, self-controlled and a bunch of these others. What specific things stand out to you the most? Is there anything new to you?
It makes sense. I would be afraid.
Yeah, it's just pretty serious.
It is, especially when you think about, not every elder, but it's certainly a key part. The teachers, from what we can tell, probably would have been elders. And James says, let not many aspire to be teachers, because you will be judged more strictly. And I believe not just like, did you get your interpretation exactly right, but did you live out the things that are clear? Is your millennial, you're going to be judged, you got the wrong millennial position, that's a pretty tough one. But did you live out the things that are totally clear?
And the decision for an elder, are they to be sought after, or are you to wait until someone expresses a desire to be an elder?
Good question.
Good question. I think, my thought is that they would be sought after. And if someone is there, I guess one thing, I've never seen a church situation that couldn't use more good elders.
You don't talk someone into being.
Yeah, you don't need to talk someone in. If you have to convince them, then they're probably not the right person. But if you go to them, and again, there's some uneasiness about it, that's not a bad thing.
And who goes to them?
I'd say other elders. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it should be something. And, as I go over this, it is something here. This church could use more capable elders. And so as we go through this, it's for the purpose of, well, we all need to know what it is, but even to trigger some thoughts of, all right, who fits this?
But it's not wrong for somebody to step up and go, I'd like to be considered.
It wouldn't be inherently wrong. And one thing you're going to see is, one thing is typical with leadership in general. You sort of recognize, a leader leads even if they don't have the title.
Isn't there a verse that says something about if you desire the position, you desire a good thing? I can tell you exactly where it's at.
Yeah, you do desire a good thing, yeah.
So there should be some desire.
That you want to do versus having to be talked into it.
But the evangelist, Timothy, Titus was an evangelist, and Paul told him to go and ordain elders in all the churches. So he probably had to ask a few guys, I would think,
To go out and do it. Yeah, 1 Timothy 3:1. The saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to the office of overseer, he desires a noble task. So you can certainly, have that there. There's nothing wrong in that sense with realizing, here's how I'm gifted. Like so many things, it's that balance. Why are you doing it? This is the way God has gifted me to serve the church versus, hey, I want to sit in that special chair. We don't have any special chairs, so you'd be out of luck. But I've seen some nice ones. And it is, in a lot of churches.
It's funny, but it's true.
It is.
They say they had that big tall. There's guys that, boy, they want to sit up there.
That's what you want. Yeah. I remember being on a related note, one of my professors in college talking about, preachers. One of them always wanted to get to the county seat church. That was the big church in the county. Like, well, that's hardly a biblical, a humble aspiration. To be a preacher, that's a great calling, but I want to be the preacher at the most prominent church in the county. You got to weigh those and see.
I just had one thought about going through all these. That's what we all should be doing. You know, we're talking leadership.
Right.
But it couldn't help but think, wow, this is.
No, it's a checklist for everyone. Yeah, it's just elders are, to be considered as an elder, you need to be doing it to a, mature degree. You're not going to be perfect, but to a mature degree, a degree that shows a high level of commitment. But yeah, this is really a list for everyone. Yeah. Anything else this morning?
It's a humbling position. Saying you will is, it's like me, the first thing I thought of is, wow, I'm a representative of the whole family. So yeah, what I do is a reflection on everybody here. And so it's like, part of you is like, I don't feel like I'm worthy enough to be a representative for the family. But when you desire that position for the respect that you want to give the family, as a representative of God too, it's a challenge.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it should be. Should be.
It's probably a lot like having, to me at least, from looking at it from the outside, I think of, like, the hardest part is probably having to deal with all the discipline. Just like it's never fun to discipline your own children. I don't think you're a great parent if you enjoy disciplining your children. But that's part of the elder's role also, is to discipline the members. And so, who wants to discipline another adult? Even worse, right, than disciplining your own children. But it's a piece of it. And if you don't take that seriously, just like your family, people are going to fall away. Like you've got to be that shepherd who protects the flock. And that's not a fun job.
Yeah, fun is not the word. If you've been an elder, I don't know if fun is the word that you would associate with it. But obviously it's an important job. The earthly leaders of the church.
But it also says we're not to make it unfun.
Yeah, that's true.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's probably
Don't make
going
it-
to happen.
don't
When
make it
people
harder.
go astray. It's our nature.
And I thought, the elders need to be one. They really need to be unified and be seen as that.
Yep.
That's where you can discipline.
And that's where those traits come in. They're not going to be unified if there's arrogance and lack of self-control and discipline and all those things.